And welcome back to Miss Clark's AP European Review. I'm a little bit tilted, not entirely sure why, and I also apologize for the noise upstairs. We have a little bit of a party going on in Mr. Gelston's room after school today, I guess. So we talked in my last video, so if you haven't watched that one, go watch that one first. And we talked in my last video all about the growth of democracy with that growth of liberalism and the revolutions of 1848. However, now we're going to talk about the suppression of democracy in the Age of Metternich. The Age of Metternich is going to be from 1815, reminder, 1815 to 1848. So when we're talking about repression of democracy, it's mostly going to talk about that conservative viewpoint through the Concert of Europe. So the Concert of Europe is going to be that first starting point. If you remember, the Concert of Europe is going to be what sets back up after Napoleon basically wrecked Europe and putting everything back in the status quo and putting the rightful leaders back to where they were supposed to be. And so you're also going to see this growth of an alliance system with Bismarck later on. With the Metternich time period, obviously, who's Metternich? Metternich is going to be an Austrian prime minister, and during this time period, Austria and Germany are going to be very, very, very interlinked. So keep that in mind as far as who's going to be making controlling choices. Germany and Austria are like pretty much linked at this point. Germany is coming together as a German confederation, and Clemens von Metternich is going to pass this thing called the Carlsbad Decrees, which basically is trying to set that conservative hold as far as a traditional monarchy, keeping that religious authority in place, trying to keep that status quo. Another person who's going to be super, super important to remember whenever you're thinking about conservatism is going to be Edmund Burke. And on the other side, in the last video, we talked about liberalism. So those people who are going to be liberal, they kind of think of is going to be like Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, who are both going to believe in that utopian society, and Montesquieu. And they're going to believe in popular sovereignty and that the economy should be intervened in by the government, not that laissez-faire theory, that there should be an individual system of rights, and that an Enlightenment ideology should take place. That's going to be the ultimate battle. Conservative versus liberal. And honestly, conservative pretty much wins after all of the revolutions of 1848 pretty much get put down. So there is one exception during this time period, and that's a little bit earlier when Greece managed to win independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1828. And they're really going to be the one liberal ideology that's going to push forward. Poland tried and failed against Russia. After the July Revolution in Russia, they totally failed to try to get independence in 1830. Basically, every single country had a revolution except for Russia and Great Britain. The only country who's really going to be different is going to be Frederick William IV of Russia and Austria. Germany and Austria. And he has this thing called the Legislative Assembly. And so he is going to try to talk to the liberals to try to enact these ideologies. But it ends up not really working in the long run, and Germany isn't really united until Bismarck is taking over and controlling Germany. Talking about German unification, you're really gonna want to remember Bismarck. So Bismarck is going to be an advisor or chancellor of Germany to King Wilhelm I. And he is going to kind of have this ideology of blood and iron, that Germany is going to become united through wars and through that nationalism that's going to be growing during this time period. He does that first off by starting a whole bunch of wars, basically. He first off starts by doing this war against Denmark in 1864, where he was hoping to annex that, and he managed to annex parts of Denmark, and then he fights in this thing called the Austro-Prussian War, because basically there was still a lot of issues in Denmark, which he ended up getting into this thing called the German Confederation, which sets up the Reichstag. If you remember anything about Hitler Week, the Reichstag is still going to be ruling over almost as like some sort of like a Congress type of a setup in Germany during this time period. He's also going to fight or not fight himself, but be a leader during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, which they end up totally blowing France out of the water, if you remember anything in my last video about Napoleon III, and ends up basically trashing Napoleon III. And another way that Bismarck really is going to unify Germany is through setting up a whole different alliance system. And so eventually they create this alliance system that's going to be between Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And if you know anything about World War I, or even like World War II, pretty much, those are going to be major countries that are going to be fighting for in World War I altogether. So Bismarck is setting up this whole cultural struggle, this idea of the Kulturkampf. And through this idea of a cultural struggle against those who don't understand the culture, it's going to be bringing people together, and bringing people together through social reforms, workmen's compensation, old age pensions, medical protection. He's going to be, he's actually taking away any reason that the liberals have to complain, instead of having any sort of a war between the liberals and conservatives like in other countries that are going to be a lot bigger. However, unfortunately for him, Wilhelm II dismissed him because he wanted to dominate his chancellors, and Bismarck wouldn't necessarily just relent to anything that Kaiser Wilhelm II did, which that's a terrible move on his part. Bismarck was great for Germany as far as unifying and nationalism altogether. So when we're talking about the unification of Italy, if you remember, are going to be broken up into, at this time period, there's going to be 4 major city-states. There's going to be the Kingdom of Naples, there's going to be the Papal States, Lombardy, Venetia, and there's also going to be the Kingdom of Sardinia. And so one of the nationalistic people that you should probably remember is going to be Giuseppe Mazzini, who is going to try to inspire Italian nationalism, but he's not going to be as important as the other Giuseppe, who's going to be Giuseppe Garibaldi. So Giuseppe Garibaldi basically comes in and unifies Italy and hands Italy in a private paper bow to Victor Emmanuel to be able to rule. A reminder that Giuseppe Garibaldi's group of men is going to be the red shirts. Another important person to remember when you're talking about Italian unification is going to be this guy whose name is Camillo de Cavour. And he's going to be the prime minister of the Italian parliament, and he is going to, of the Kingdom of Sardinia. And he is going to have this idea that basically Italy is only going to be taken by force. And so they are going to decide that Sardinia is going to lead the battle. And in order to get that done, he has to reform his state by weakening the control of the papacy, investing in public works, growing the country itself. And then he also, after the Crimean War, he ends up persuading Napoleon III to send in an army so that way he could maneuver Austria into a war. And then they ended up, Austria declared war on Sardinia, and the French came to his aid. And when all of this is going on, when there is this war between Austria and with the aid of France, this ends up unifying a good portion of Italy together to fight against the Austrians. And this is when it basically creates the perfect scenario for Giuseppe Garibaldi to come in and unify Italy underneath the king, and that king is going to go right up until World War I. And so that's going to be the repression of democracy and the unification of Italy and Germany.